The Samnite Wars, often overshadowed by Rome's later conquests, were the brutal proving ground of Roman expansionism, a century-long crucible that forged the Republic's path to dominance over the Italian peninsula. Between 343 and 290 BC, Rome fought three punishing wars against the Samnites, a fierce confederation of hill tribes in central and southern Italy. These conflicts were not simple frontier skirmishes. They were drawn-out contests of will, strategy and adaptation, deeply entangled with Roman relations with Latin allies, Etruscans, Greeks and Gauls. In this recap, we'll explore how Rome's struggle against the Samnites shaped its military doctrine, political unity and expansionist vision, and why these wars were the true rehearsal for empire. The First Samnite War, from 343 to 341 BC, started with a request for aid. The Campanian city of Capua, under pressure from Samnite aggression, appealed to Rome for protection. Although Rome and the Samnites were technically allies at the time, Rome chose to intervene, and the short campaign saw several Roman victories, including the Battle of Mount Gaurus, led by the rising military figure Marcus Valerius Corvus. But this war ended abruptly and inconclusively, likely because of pressure on the Roman home front. The Latin allies were growing restless, and their discontent would soon erupt into the Latin War, an event that would reset Rome's power structure and its alliance system across Latium. The Second Samnite War, the longest and most consequential of the three, raged from 326 to 304 BC. It began over control of Neapolis, a Greek city that had become a flashpoint between Roman and Samnite interests. Rome's opening moves were aggressive and initially successful, but in 321 BC, at the Battle of the Caudine Forks, Roman forces were humiliatingly trapped in a mountain pass and forced to surrender under degrading conditions. The image of Roman soldiers passing under the yoke, a symbolic form of submission, seared itself into Roman collective memory. Yet Rome was not deterred. What followed was a two-decade war of attrition, raids, shifting alliances and brutal frontier battles. Rome adopted new tactics, built more roads and colonies, and slowly adapted its army to fight in mountainous terrain. Samnite guerrilla warfare met a stubborn, evolving Roman war machine. By the end of the war, Rome had decisively shifted from being one regional power among many to becoming the central hegemon of Italy. Key cities had been subdued, Latin colonies had spread, and Roman political control began to extend far beyond Latium. The Third Samnite War, from 298 to 290 BC, was the final and most dramatic chapter. It involved a grand alliance of Rome's enemies, the Samnites, Etruscans, Umbrians and Gauls, who feared Roman domination and sought to halt it. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Sentinum in 295 BC, where Roman consuls Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus and Publius Decius Mus faced off against the coalition. It was a massive coordinated battle, and during its climax, Decius Mus, following a family tradition, committed devotio, riding into the enemy lines in a sacrificial charge to win divine favour. Rome emerged victorious, and the defeat shattered the coalition. Over the next years, the Samnites fought on alone, but by 290 BC, their will had been broken, and the war ended with their subjugation. These wars reshaped everything. Rome had learned how to fight in rough terrain, how to manage a complex network of colonies and allies, and how to wage long-term wars of exhaustion and consolidation. Perhaps more importantly, the Samnite Wars taught Rome the necessity of adapting, militarily, diplomatically and politically. The manipular legion system, which would define Roman warfare for the next 2 centuries, likely evolved during this time, giving Rome flexibility and discipline that allowed it to dominate different kinds of terrain and opponents. The result was not just a military victory, but the emergence of a Roman identity based on tenacity, resilience, and the unrelenting pursuit of supremacy. The Samnite Wars were not isolated contests, but were woven into the fabric of Rome's broader ascent. These wars coincided with, and in many ways catalyzed, major internal transformations. The expansion of Roman citizenship to new allies, the establishment of Latin colonies in hostile territory, And the increasing use of road systems, most notably the Via Appia constructed during the Second Samnite War, all laid the infrastructure for Rome's future dominance. The wars also placed intense demands on the Roman political system, forcing innovation and discipline in the consular and senatorial leadership. Commanders like Fabius Rullianus and Decius Mus became not only military icons but also models of Roman civic virtue, devotion and sacrifice. Perhaps what's most striking is how the Samnite Wars mirrored and foreshadowed so many later Roman conflicts. They featured deeply entrenched enemies with home field advantages, shifting coalitions and ideological undertones, Rome as order bringer, its enemies as threats to unity. The same pattern would appear in the Punic Wars, the wars of conquest in Greece and the East, and even in the civil wars of the late Republic. The stubbornness that Rome showed during the Samnite Wars became an enduring characteristic of Roman foreign policy and military conduct. They would not be deterred by setbacks, they would not surrender. They would absorb defeats, learn from them and come back stronger. It was the Roman way. From a regional power with fragile alliances and limited reach, Rome emerged from the Samnite conflicts with a reputation for both ferocity and stability. Their colonies were not just military outposts, they were instruments of integration, Romanization and surveillance. The Roman approach to defeated enemies, sometimes harsh, sometimes accommodating, reflected a maturing strategy that was more than just conquest. It was domination by structure. The Samnites, for their part, never fully recovered. Though they would later fight Rome again in support of Pyrrhus and Hannibal, their days as a major power had ended in the blood-soaked hills of central Italy. In the historical arc of the Roman Republic, the Samnite Wars serve as the pivot from local ambition to continental vision. They are where Rome transitioned from reactive to proactive, from defender to conqueror, from Latin hegemon to Italian master. Without these wars, there is no Punic conflict, no Macedonian campaigns, no Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Everything Rome became was born in these early tests, where tribal resistance met a republic just beginning to understand its destiny. So the next time you think of Rome's military genius, think not of elephants at Zama or sieges in Judea, but of muddy mountain passes, ambushes in the Apennines, and legions crawling across rugged landscapes to face warriors just as fierce, just as proud, and just as determined. In defeating the Samnites, Rome did not just expand, it evolved.